The afternoon sun hung low over Washington, D.C., casting a golden haze across the city's iconic skyline. But inside a sleek apartment near the White House, a storm was brewing. Karoline Leavitt, at just 27, the youngest White House press secretary in history, lounged on her couch, her navy blazer draped over a chair, a tiny silver cross pinned to its collar catching the light. She'd barely settled in, her haven of neatly stacked documents and pressed business attire a testament to her disciplined life, when her phone jolted her upright. The name on the screen sent a shiver down her spine. President Trump. His voice crackled through, urgent and commanding, leaving no room for hesitation. "Karoline, there's a religious case at the DC local court. Christians suing over a ban on public prayer. Go now, observe, report." Before she could process, the line went dead. Her heart thudded. This wasn't just another crisis to spin for the press. This hit her core, her faith, that little cross she wore like a badge from her New Hampshire roots. She grabbed her blazer, slipped into a crisp white shirt and black pants, and bolted for her black SUV, tires squealing as she tore through the Capitol's snarled traffic. NPR blared the day's headlines, but she snapped it off. Silence sharpened her focus. Whatever awaited her at that courthouse, she'd face it head on. The DC local court loomed ahead, its glass doors reflecting the fading daylight as Karoline shoved them open and stepped into chaos. The air was thick, humid with the buzz of restless voices, an off-key symphony of citizens tangled in petty disputes over parking tickets and late rent. She glanced at her watch. 2:53 p.m. Minutes until the case Trump sent her for would begin. Weaving through the crowd, she claimed a hard wooden chair mid-row, her document bag thudding beside her as she pulled out her phone to take notes. The silver cross gleamed under the fluorescent lights, unnoticed by her, but drawing curious eyes from the room. To her left, a middle-aged man in a faded "I Am King" t-shirt scrolled lazily on his phone. To her right, a young woman whispered to her lawyer, an oversized necklace dangling like a chandelier around her neck. Karoline's brow furrowed. No dress code here, apparently. The room wasn't big, but its clutter, piles of files, clacking, keyboards from the clerk's corner, made it feel like a pressure cooker. She steadied herself, zeroing in on her mission. A Christian group suing the government for banning prayer in a local park. Trump wanted this as a conservative rallying cry, and she was his lens. A wooden door creaked open behind the judge's bench, and the room snapped to attention. Judge Charles Hargrove emerged, 62 years old, his salt and pepper hair slicked back, wire-rimmed glasses slipping down his nose, black robe crisp as if starched that morning. His presence was a cold front, silencing the murmurs. "All rise," barked James Wilson, a towering bailiff with a stern jaw. Karoline stood, phone still in hand, studying Hargrove as he settled in, his sharp eyes sweeping the crowd like a hawk. He banged his gavel, the sound a gunshot through the stillness. "This is a court of law, not a stage for personality," he growled, voice deep and slicing. Cases flew by, $50 for a parking violation, a warning for late rent. Hargrove ran it like a machine, efficient, emotionless. The "I Am King" guy shuffled up for a neighbor spat. Hargrove didn't blink at his shirt. The necklace woman got her turn, no comment on her bling. Karoline scribbled notes, unease creeping in. Something felt off. Then Hargrove's gaze locked on her. He froze mid-sentence, papers rustling as his eyes narrowed behind those glasses. "Miss Leavitt," he said, voice icy but tinged with recognition. The crowd shifted, whispers rippling. He'd clocked her from White House briefings. "That cross," Hargrove pointed at her neck, his tone hardening, "doesn't belong here. This courtroom is neutral, not a church." Karoline glanced around, no signs banning symbols anywhere. She stood, voice steady as steel. "I'm Karoline Leavitt, White House press secretary, here to observe a case for work. This is a personal item, protected by the First Amendment. I'm breaking no rules." Hargrove's face twitched, a smirk curling his lips. Work? This isn't the place to wear that and stir trouble. Neutral ground, not a pulpit. He banged his gavel again, as if to stamp his authority. James Wilson tilted his head, watching. Mrs. Thompson, the middle-aged clerk with a tight bun, paused her typing, eyes flicking to Karoline. The "I am king" guy and necklace lady whispered, stunned. Hargrove ignored their flair. Karoline gripped, her phone tighter. This wasn't about her. It was the cross he hated. "Sir, I have the right to wear it under the First Amendment," she said, calm but firm. Hargrove cut her off, voice rising. "Don't lecture me on law. Step up to the bench, now." The room held its breath as she walked forward, heels clicking on the worn floor, the silver cross a tiny beacon in the storm brewing around her. Standing at the defendant's stand, Karoline faced Hargrove, his elevated perch giving him a king's vantage. But she didn't flinch. His glasses glinted as he leaned forward, voice low and razor-sharp. "What are you doing here with that thing, Miss Leavitt?" She met his stare, thumb discreetly starting a recording on her phone. "I'm here on duty, sir, and I have the right to wear it." He slammed his gavel, the echo rattling the room. "I've seen plenty like you, thinking faith lets them disrupt anywhere. This is my courtroom, and I say it's not allowed. Contempt of court. Know what that means?" She glanced at the "I am king" guy, then necklace lady, untouched. "Sir, I'm not disrupting. If there's a specific ban, show me the rule." Hargrove's smirk turned cold. "A rule? I am the rule. You walked in disrespecting my court, demanding documents now?" He banged the gavel so hard Mrs. Thompson flinched, her typing stalling. Whispers swelled. An older man in back muttered, "That necklace is bigger. Why is he quiet?" James Wilson's eyes narrowed, sensing a pattern he'd seen before. Karoline took a breath, choosing strategy over shouting. "If I've broken a rule, I deserve a clear explanation." Hargrove sneered, leaning in. "Here's your explanation. $500 fine for contempt. Pay today. Maybe that'll teach you respect. This isn't a church, Miss Leavitt, or your stage." He leaned back, smug as a victor. The crowd gasped. 500? Mrs. Thompson's fingers hovered, uneasy. The "I am king" guy chuckled, then shrank under Hargrove's glare. Karoline stood firm, voice even but edged with steel. "I understand. You're ruling, sir, but why aren't others fined? Printed shirts, big necklaces." Hargrove's face flushed, knuckles white on the gavel. "Don't dodge the issue. You're the only one bold enough to flaunt a religious symbol here. That's the difference." She nodded slightly, his words confirming her hunch. This was targeted, personal, anti-Christian. Mrs. Thompson resumed typing, hands trembling. She'd never seen Hargrove this harsh over so little in 12 years. James Wilson crossed his arms, a flicker of empathy in his gaze. The crowd buzzed, phones sneaking. Out despite rules. Karoline's mind raced. This wasn't just a fine, it was a crack in the system she could pry open. "Are you done, sir?" she asked, voice soft but piercing. Hargrove blinked, thrown by her calm. "Not yet. Pay, sit, we move on." She stepped closer to the bench, hand resting on its edge, eyes locked on his. "I'll pay, but we're not done." His smirk wavered as she stood there, the cross gleaming like a dare, the room electric with anticipation. The air in the courtroom thickened as Karoline Leavitt squared off with Judge Charles Hargrove, her $500 fine hanging like a guillotine blade. His face glowed red with triumph. Gavel still clutched tight, but she didn't budge. Mrs. Thompson's anxious eyes darted between them, fingers frozen over her keys. James Wilson stood poised, sensing a shift. Hargrove broke the silence, voice clipped. "Did you hear me, Miss Leavitt? $500 payable today. Sit down. We've got business." Karoline inhaled, resting her hand on the bench, her voice slicing through. "Sir, before I sit, I need to clarify something for the record." Hargrove's brow creased, her steadiness rattling him. "The record? You've got no right to demand anything." His tone cracked, betraying unease. She smiled, not mocking, but a quiet confidence. and pulled a gold-gleaming White House card from her bag, holding it high. "I'm Karoline Leavitt, White House press secretary under President Donald Trump. But what you don't know, Judge Hargrove, is I don't just talk pretty. I know the law deeper than you might think." The crowd erupted in gasps. The I Am King guy's jaw dropped. Necklace Lady whispered frantically to her lawyer. Hargrove froze, gavel mid-air. "That doesn't change your breach of my rules," he muttered, voice fading. Karoline stepped, closer, voice ringing out. "Your rules or your bias? I'm here on the president's orders to watch a case. Christians suing for public prayer rights. This cross? My religious freedom. First Amendment. You fine me, but do you know the law?" Hargrove's face hardened, pushing back. "I don't need your lessons. This is my courtroom." She cut in, voice a whip. "You're wrong, sir. The law isn't yours alone. Church of Lukumi Babalu, I vs. City of Hialeah, 1993. Supreme Court ruled banning religious symbols without just cause violates the Constitution. What's your just cause, or is it just dislike?" Silence crashed down. Phones snapped pics illicitly. Mrs. Thompson held her breath. James Wilson nodded faintly, impressed. She'd flipped the script. Karoline pressed on, voice a honed blade. "You fine me $500 for contempt, but look around. That man's shirt breaks dress code. Her necklace screams louder than my cross. You ignored them. Only my Christian symbol sparked this. That's not law, it's bias." Hargrove trembled, red fading to pale. "You're slandering me," he stammered, unconvincing. She raised her phone. "I've recorded everything since you called me up. I've texted the White House reporting this. Fine me, but this isn't over." The crowd buzzed. Someone shouted, "She's right." Claps broke out, hushed by James Wilson. Hargrove flailed. "Miss Leavitt, I'll withdraw the fine. No need to escalate." His gavel tapped feebly. She shook her head, eyes blazing. "Withdrawing it because of who I am proves you're wronger. The issue's your court. I demand you review 6 months of fines for religious symbols and mandate First Amendment training for all staff, including you." The room exploded. Claps, shouts, "That's right!" from the back. Mrs. Thompson typed furiously, eyes alight. Hargrove slumped, face ashen, hands shaking, staring at Karoline, a foe he'd underestimated. "You think I'm just a spokesperson," she said, low and fierce. "But I've fought with Trump through lawsuits galore. I taught myself law to defend him. And now, myself and others. Big mistake, Judge." Applause swelled as she set her card on the bench, the cross her victory flag. Karoline stepped out of the courthouse into the late afternoon sun, the silver, cross glinting as she checked her phone, 3:30 p.m. She'd sent the recording to Trump's team with a note. "Hargrove fined me for the cross. Handled it. Next steps." Inside, the crowd still hummed. An older man muttered, "Never seen." A judge taken down that fast. A young woman whispered, "She's the press secretary. Amazing." Mrs. Thompson printed the transcript, hands trembling with awe. James Wilson called a buddy, voice low. "A young woman just silenced Hargrove. You've got to hear this." The story leaked fast. By 4 p.m., X lit up, crossing court trending. A witness tweeted, "Judge fines White House press SEC $500 for a cross. She fights back with law, leaves him speechless." Comments flooded. "Who is she? Unreal." A conservative account posted, "Proof the system hates Christians. Thank you, Karoline Leavitt." Then Trump weighed in. "Karoline Leavitt, my amazing spokesperson, taught a leftist judge a lesson on religious freedom. Legal genius. We won't let faith be crushed." 50,000 retweets in half an hour. Fox News ran it. Press secretary faces off with judge over cross, wins big. Karoline's phone buzzed. A senior advisor. "You did great. Trump wants this loud. Prep a statement." She smiled. This was just the start. This was just... Back in his dim office, Hargrove sat alone, phone ringing off the hook. Judicial counsel, reporters, colleagues. He silenced it, hands shaking over cold coffee, muttering, "She's just a girl. How?" But he knew he'd hit a wall bigger. than himself. Mrs. Thompson couldn't stay quiet, calling a friend at a paper. 12 years with Hargrove. He targets Christian symbols, crosses especially. That girl was right. I've got notes. She clutched a notebook of cases, fines for crosses, hijabs, while slogan tees slid by. James Wilson hit the break room, voice tight. I've seen Hargrove fine religious symbols 20 times this year. Rude shirts? He laughs. Leavitt exposed it. A colleague nodded. I'll call the press. By 5 p.m, Channel 7 was live outside. White House press sec fined $500 for a cross, fought back. Crossing courts exploding. X surged. 100,000 mentions. Stories poured in. He fined me $200 for a prayer badge. Scolded a mum over a cross. A shaky courtroom clip, Karoline's voice booming, hit 1 million views. In her car, she called her husband, voice calm but electric. Honey, I shut down a judge. This is huge. He laughed. You always do wild stuff. Stay safe. Trump's team emailed. Press conference tonight. We're winning this. Hargrove watched his face flash on the news. Judge faces backlash and switched it off, career teetering, all from a 27-year-old and her tiny cross. Morning broke, and the DC Judicial Council's office buzzed like a war room. Linda Martinez, a 20-year veteran investigator, spread Hargrove's case files across a table, her team scrambling since 6 a.m. after Karoline's White House complaint. 48 hours to report, Linda said, voice iron. Find every religious symbol case. Karoline, in her White House office, prepped for the night's press conference, emailing Trump's advisor. X has got hundreds accusing Hargrove of bias. Push it. Her phone pinged. Lawyers, supporters, a law student. Hargrove fined my mum for a cross. You inspire me. She smiled. This was everyone's fight now. At the courthouse, Mrs. Thompson handed Linda her notebook, voice quaking. 12 years. He targets crosses, hijabs, anything religious. Crude shirts? Nothing. Linda flipped pages. $300 for a cross, $200 for a hijab. Frowning. This is gold. James Wilson added a statement. 15 years here. Hargrove fined religious symbols 3 times more. One day, 5 crosses, 0 vulgar shirts. Linda's team dug in. 70% of last year's religious fines hit Christians, $250 average, double other penalties. Hargrove faced the council via Zoom, head in hands. I didn't mean bias, he rasped. Linda fired back. Crosses fined 80% harsher. Explain that. He mumbled, I didn't realize, recalling Karoline's First Amendment jab. By noon, Linda's report was done. Not just Hargrove. 3 other DC judges show milder bias, but he's blatant, especially against Christians. Suspension hit. X erupted. Crossing court. Hargrove out. Karoline shakes the system. At 6 p.m, Karoline stood in the White House briefing room. Cross gleaming, Trump clapping her shoulder. You made me proud. Religious freedom's untouchable tonight. She faced the cameras, voice steady. Yesterday, a judge fined me for my faith, not because I was wrong, but because he thought he was above the law. I fought for everyone, treated unfairly. Questions flew. She cited law and X data coolly. Hargrove watched, trembling, then read Lukumi Babaluai online, sighing. She's right. I was wrong. Next day, he resigned to the council, voice hoarse. I'll train others. Karoline opened my eyes. Linda nodded. His shift could help. X debated. He's faking. No, he's rare to admit fault. Karoline got Linda's email. Hargrove resigned, training. You changed him. She smiled at her cross in the mirror. The spark had grown. 4 days later, Washington felt different. Karoline gazed out her White House window, cross shining, phone buzzing with thanks from Trump, conservatives, citizens. The council's email glowed. New regs. No symbol bans unless disruptive mandatory First Amendment training. Thank you, Miss Leavitt. On X, Crossing Court roared, DC changes laws thanks to Karoline. Hargrove, no judge now, stood at training, raspy. I was wrong. Leavitt taught me bias blinds. Don't let it. Mrs. Thompson, now transparency chief, took notes. James Wilson trained bailiffs. Leavitt spoke. We must too. Karoline framed her $500 receipt, a reminder of one voice's power. Trump grinned. You're a star. The freedom crowd loves you. Keep it going. States like Texas and Florida followed. Governors tweeting, lawyers filing. X lit up with symbol pics. My freedom. In Virginia, 5,000 cheered her, banners, waving. That day I just did my job, she said. But when he fined my faith, I couldn't stay quiet. This is our win. The cross gleamed, dubbed Resilience online. Linda wrote, You changed the system. Karoline eyed the frame, ready for more. Trump called her gold, and she knew she was just beginning. 3 months on, Karoline stood at the White House podium, cross a beacon to millions. Reporters, TikTokers, faith reps hanging on her words. 3 months ago, I just wanted to work, she began. But a fine for my faith made me fight for all of you. We've changed the system. Claps roared, GH crossing court signs waved. DC's courthouse bore a new plaque. Justice honors all faiths. A law student wrote, Your case gave me courage. I'm starting a clinic for faith discrimination. Charles Hargrove taught classes. Leavitt showed me justice has no bias. Mrs. Thompson and James Wilson kept courts honest. Trump called, You're my warrior, keep it up. On the White House balcony, sunset painting DC, Karoline held her cross, a flame now spreading nationwide. The council offered her a national reform role. She smiled, whispering, Freedom takes fighters. From one day, she'd reshaped laws, inspired millions, and proved one belief can shake the world.